He was an engineer in his 40s, financially careful, not the kind of person who trusted strangers online. One day he received a text message. Someone apologized, said they had the wrong number. 6 weeks later, he had wired his entire life savings, money he had spent decades building, into accounts he would never see again. He wasn't impulsive. He wasn't naive. He was systematically worked, one step at a time, until transferring the money felt like the rational decision. This is called pig butchery. It is one of the most financially devastating fraud operations running globally right now. And we are going to walk through it from the inside, the way the people running it actually think about it. Week 1, the message arrives. Sorry, I think I have the wrong number. Most people ignore it. Some respond. The sender doesn't push. They apologize. They appear respectful. They even offer to end the conversation entirely. That offer to leave is deliberate, because people tend to trust interactions where they believe they remain in control. Nothing is being sold. No money is mentioned. No urgency is created. The conversation feels voluntary because it is designed to feel that way. The victim decides to continue, maybe out of politeness, maybe out of curiosity. It doesn't matter which. Either way, the operation has what it needs at this stage: a name in the contact list and a conversation the victim chose not to end. The only objective in week 1 is presence, not persuasion, not profit, just a continued exchange that the victim does not feel compelled to close. That restraint, the absence of any ask, is what makes the first stage so effective. It produces exactly the opposite of what a victim would expect from a scam, and that contrast is the point. Weeks 2 and 3, the conversation continues, not constantly, just enough to become routine. Questions about work, about daily life, about interests and habits. The scammer is not making conversation. They are building a profile, identifying what the victim values, what they worry about, what they aspire to. And then the mirroring begins. If the victim exercises, the scammer exercises. If the victim is focused on their career, the scammer understands the demand of a demanding career. If the victim mentions investing, the scammer is interested in investing too. This works because familiarity and perceived similarity are among the most reliable trust accelerators in human psychology. We extend confidence to people we believe are like us. The scammer is constructing that perception deliberately across days and weeks of small interactions. None of this is improvised. Operations running at scale use scripted conversation guides, documented playbooks covering how to respond to dozens of different victim profiles. The warmth feels personal. The infrastructure behind it is not. By the end of week 3, many victims describe the relationship as genuinely meaningful, a real friendship, sometimes something closer. They have been in daily contact. The other person has never asked for anything. They seem to understand the victim in ways that feel uncommon. That feeling is the foundation everything else is built on. The longer this phase runs, the more the victim will resist outside warnings later. Because accepting that the relationship is fraudulent means accepting that every moment of it was manufactured. Most people find that very difficult to do. Weeks 3 and 4. Money enters the conversation, indirectly. The scammer mentions an investment, not as a pitch, as a casual reference, a trade that performed well, a platform they have been using, something they are genuinely excited about. They're not asking the victim to participate. they're simply shared. Screenshots appear sometimes. Account balances, profit figures, not delivered as proof, just offered as part of a normal conversation between people who share things with each other. In many documented cases, the victim asks about the investment first. They want to know more. The scammer had not brought it up directly. That sequence is not accidental. People place significantly more confidence in decisions they believe they initiated themselves. The conditions were created. The victim walked into them. The image being constructed is one of access and competence. Someone who has found something that works, someone worth paying attention to, not a salesperson, a peer who got there first and is willing to share. At this point, many victims remain cautious. They are interested but not committed. They have questions, they want to see more before doing anything. That caution is anticipated, which is exactly why the next phase of the operation is built around producing what looks like real evidence. Weeks 4 and 5. The test withdrawal. The victim is encouraged to start small. A few $100s, perhaps a little bit more. Nothing that feels like a significant risk. The funds go into what appears to be a functioning investment platform, charts, account history, trade confirmations, a professional interface. The balance grows. The numbers look right. And then the victim takes the step that changes everything. They request a withdrawal. And it works. The money arrives. It is in their account. From the victim's perspective, that moment is verification. The platform is real. The process is legitimate. The relationship that introduced it is trustworthy. They tested the system, and it passed. But the withdrawal was never verification. It was the most expensive bait in the operation. A controlled demonstration, often funded directly by the criminal network, designed specifically to dissolve the last meaningful resistance before the real extraction begins. The amount returned was trivial compared to what the operation expects to recover. The victim is now holding what feels like proof. And proof, even manufactured proof, is extraordinarily difficult to argue against. Weeks 5 and 6. The pace changes. A special opportunity appears. A limited window. A trade that requires a larger position to make sense. Something time-sensitive. The scammer frames it as something they are doing themselves and invites the victim to join. The victim deposits more than before. The platform confirms it. The balance climbs. Then another opportunity. Another deposit. The numbers on screen keep growing. The victim believes they are accumulating real wealth. But behind the interface, nothing is happening. No trades are being executed. No investment activity exists. The balance the victim is watching is a number that the operators of the platform can set to any value they choose, at any time, for any reason. The display is not connected to real financial activity. It exists for one purpose only: to keep the victim depositing. Then the victim decides to withdraw a significant amount, and a problem appears. Taxes that must be settled before the funds can be released, a compliance verification triggered by the transfer size, an anti-money laundering hold that requires a processing fee to clear. The specific explanation varies between operations. The structure is always the same. Send more money to access the money you already have. This is where the psychology becomes particularly precise. Stopping now means losing everything already deposited. Paying the fee, at least in the victim's understanding, means recovering it. The rational calculation, given what the victim believes to be true, points toward paying. So many pay, and face another fee. A new complication, a further requirement, each one framed as the final obstacle between the victim and their money, until there is nothing left to send. And the platform, the account, and the person on the other end all disappear simultaneously. The money was never there. The balance was never real. The entire interface was a controlled environment, built to produce a specific sequence of decisions. Here's what actually happened to the funds mechanically. When the victim transferred money, those funds moved from their bank account into cryptocurrency through a legitimate exchange. The cryptocurrency was then transferred to a wallet controlled by the operation. From there, the funds were layered, moved through a series of additional wallets and accounts, specifically to separate them from their point of origin. This is standard money laundering tradecraft. Each layer makes tracing more difficult. By the time a fraud report is filed, the funds have typically moved through enough intermediary points that recovery is no longer practically possible. The platform the victim was watching throughout, the charts, the growing balance, the trade confirmations, was the display layer. The user interface built to influence behavior. It had no connection to any actual financial activity. The victim was not watching their money grow. They were watching a number on a screen that someone else controlled entirely. The account balance was a fiction maintained for as long as it was useful. Red flag 1. The returns look too consistent. Real markets carry uncertainty. They rise and fall in ways that are not predictable in advance. Legitimate investments produce losses alongside gains, sometimes significant ones. Volatility is not a flaw in real markets. It is a feature of how they function. Fraudulent platforms frequently display unusually smooth growth, steady upward curves, minimal drawdowns, returns that appear regardless of what is actually happening in global markets, performance that seems almost immune to conditions outside the platform. If a platform appears to have eliminated risk entirely, examine that closely. What it may have actually eliminated is any connection to real financial activity. Genuine investment risk cannot be removed. It can only be hidden or fabricated away. Red flag 2. You are required to pay in order to access your own funds. Legitimate financial institutions may deduct fees or taxes from an available balance at the point of withdrawal. They do not require you to send additional money from outside the platform before releasing funds you already own. If you are told that a tax payment, compliance fee, or processing charge must be made externally before your withdrawal can proceed, regardless of how that requirement is explained, you're looking at one of the clearest operational signatures of this type of fraud. The reason many victims continue paying at this stage is not that they have stopped thinking clearly. It is that the sunk cost is real. The emotional investment is real. Stopping feels like choosing to lose. That pressure is not a byproduct of the operation. It is one of its intended outputs. Red flag 3. The investment arrived through a personal relationship. This is the signal that matters most, and the one that is most often rationalized away. The opportunity did not come through a regulated financial advisor, a licensed platform, or a verifiable institution. It came through someone the victim had grown to trust personally. Here is a diagnostic worth keeping. If the person introducing the investment stands to benefit, directly or indirectly, from your participation in it, the guidance they are offering you is not neutral. It cannot be. Their interests and yours are not aligned, regardless of how the relationship feels. Legitimate investment opportunities do not require emotional attachment as a precondition for access. They do not arrive through relationships that were built in the weeks immediately before the introduction. When those two things appear together, the new personal connection and an investment opportunity, Examine the investment with significantly more scrutiny than you would otherwise apply. The relationship is not incidental to the fraud. It is the mechanism the fraud runs on. One more thing worth saying directly. These operations do not succeed because victims are financially unsophisticated or insufficiently cautious. They succeed because the manipulation is carefully sequenced. Trust is established before money is raised. Small commitments are made before large ones. Verification, controlled stage verification, is allowed to happen before the real extraction begins. Each step is designed to move below the threshold where a person's normal judgment would intervene. The emotional investment accumulates gradually. By the time the warning signs are visible, the psychology cost of acting on them is very high. Most people do not walk away easily from something they have spent weeks building and believing in. That is not a failure of intelligence or character. It is a predictable response to a process that was engineered to produce exactly that outcome. If this describes something that has happened to you or someone close to you, report it. These operations run on silence. Most victims never report. Most cases are never documented. This gap is part of what keeps the operation viable. If you found this breakdown useful, share it with someone who needs to understand how this actually works. The mechanics are not complicated once they are laid out clearly. That clarity is the only defense most people have access to. See you in the next one. Thanks for watching.